Okay, we got it. It says in stream on there, but it hasn't shown it yet. And like I said, it's been a while since I've actually used this channel, so the stuff is probably
Mhm.
all crazy and everything. Um, that's set up, and now I have to get you back on here. And from this point on, I'm not moving anything. It's just gonna be your avatar is gonna be in full screen, so I can't bounce back and
Okay.
forth. Whenever I hit record, I'll do the introduction, blah blah blah, and then it's you. It's like I said
Okay.
before. So, and don't worry,
Nice.
Rush, you'll hear it again. So it's just basically cut and dry. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna do my countdown and I'll get it started. Okay.
All
Oh,
right.
and wow. All right, we are good to go. I believe. Yeah, we are good to go on Rumble too. So, yeah. Blah blah blah. I just heard my own voice.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, that always makes me weird. Okay. Now it's for sure. So, three,
Mm,
2, 1, now. Oh, that, well, that it's not going to be able to hit record. So what I'll do is I'll do the count and then we'll do the stream. I forgot to change the recording from the video too. So 3, 2, 1, now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Storyteller. Today, I have yet another story that I have, or another story that I found somebody who's willing to tell. And this is bobdub. This episode is going to be the memoirs of bobdub. I hope you guys enjoy it. Now, before we get started, I want to kind of lay out the rules behind this because there is a certain way that we do this. Now, this time period, this right here is all your time, Bob Dub. So, what we do is we let you start your story, and you say your story all the way through, okay? And before we started the video, I asked you if it was okay for everybody to make give feedback or make comments afterwards, after you tell your story, and you agreed to do that, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh,
Thanks, Roger. Yeah.
okay. So what happens is after you give your story, we'll open it up to everybody on the panel who's listening in, and they can give you feedback or ask you questions. Today we have Otto Excelsior, he's a pretty cool dude, and we have Russian Waves, another pretty cool dude. Now, these two, as well as myself, have been influenced by Bob Dub in a lot of great ways. This is a really great person, so um, if you really want to hear somebody's story, this is the person that you want to listen to. So with that, I'm going to shut my mouth and I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob Dub.
Wow, Roger, thank you so much. What a beautiful, beautiful introduction. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you for your support and guidance. It's just so wonderful to be on this journey with you. So thank you for letting me be here. And to Otto and Rush, you guys have been with me right from the beginning. You have held my hand every step of the way. And it's just amazing to me that you will, at a moment's notice, drop everything else that you're doing and just come and sit here with me in this space and just listen to me. So there aren't really words to tell you how honored I am to have this privilege to be with you and that you want to hear where I've come from. So I started in 1964 when I was born. in Rhodesia. It's a British colony. I was born um, in the hospital there, in the sort of the white colonial hospital. And my dad wasn't present, of course, because that would never do. That would be very rude. And so he was off walking up and down the streets. I think I was born at 4 o'clock in the morning. And a week later, he packed Mom and me up into a caravan, and we went off into the middle of the bush, somewhere in the middle of Rhodesia. And there was just him and his camp and a couple of other surveyors that worked for the government. And that was my home for the first 12 months of my life, is I lived in this strange little bush camp in the middle of Rhodesia. And so many stories there of my dad encountering elephants when he was out doing surveys, and went to get they used to dig big pits, big soil pits. They used to jump down into the pits. It was about 6 foot deep, and they would read the soil sample, and then they'd have to like crawl out again of the pit. And this was his job. This was how he spent his days. And the stories that he told overnights of the ant bears that he found in his hole. And yeah, crazy times. I really grew up in this strange bush world. I didn't know any other children, and the only other adult company that I encountered was in the bush pub. Apparently they had a boss that used to come and knock on their door at 12 o'clock at night and say, "Get up, Rob and Liz, get up, we're going down to the pub." And he'd make them get up out of bed and get me, and my dad would carry me in his arm, under his arm like this. He'd have his arm around Mom on the other side, and they'd get in this Jeep, and they'd all go down to this bush pub with this guy, and we'd all sit around and have beers in the middle of the night and go home again. And this was my sort of ground zero. And then when I was 13 months old, my mum had another baby. It was a little boy, and I think the bush had become a little bit difficult for her by then. And so my grandpa built us a cottage on his little small holding. It was a half an hour's drive out of the city of Salisbury in Rhodesia, on the high veld, in a little town called Rua. It actually wasn't really much of a town as much as just a farming community. And there was massive ranches around us with tobacco plants everywhere. And they used to have these rotations of tobacco and maize and cattle, and they used to put it through to keep the soil balanced. One season they put through the tobacco, which would strip the soil of all its nitrogen. So the next season they would grow maize, which would then replenish the soil of its nitrogen. And then the next season they would run beasts, which would come through and fertilize the earth. So it was amazing. And it was sandfelt where we lived. And underneath our 100 acres that we lived on was sheet rock. There was one crack in the bedrock, and there was one borehole that went down. And then there was our little cottage, and then all around there was just this patch of bush in the middle of this farmland where nothing could be done because the bedrock was about 2 feet under the soil, the surface of the soil. So my grandfather got an amazingly good deal. He had been an engineer in the Royal British Engineers, and he'd spent 10 years in Burma during the Second World War. And he'd been part of building a huge, great railway line from one part of the country to the other. And after the war, he went back to London to my granny and his 3 little boys, and they decided to leave Britain and start again. And so he got this piece of land that couldn't be used for farming, It was in the middle of farmland. And he did all sorts of little small scale things. I think he'd lost his hip, but I don't know if it was directly in the war. Don't believe it was in the war, but it was probably as a result of, those were hard times. And so he potted around, and he did market gardening. And one day Mum asked my brother to run into the garden and get some parsley. And he ran into the garden and he came back with all the carrot tops. Poor old grandpa wasn't happy. So he had 5,000 chickens. Don't like chickens at all. I don't like chickens. 5,000. But they're cute as when they're babies. And it was just this idyllic life in colonial Africa. And the weather was perfect and everything was wonderful. And then my granny died of cancer, and then my grandpa left 3 or 4 years later. He'd done. And very soon after that, the war started escalating, and we needed to take all sorts of precautions to keep ourselves safe. And so those were days when we used to have these big screens made out of chicken wire that was stretched over our windows, so that if anybody came with a grenade and threw it through our window, it would bounce back at them. And down our corridor Dad got soil bags that he had from the government, where he, for when he was taking soil samples. And he went out, and when they dug the pits, he got them to fill in these sample bags. And then he brought them all home in one of the jeeps, and we built sandbag tunnels down the corridor where the police radio was. Every morning when we woke up, the police radio would go at 4 in the morning, and we would all signal through our call signs, all to say that we'd made it through the night. And so we had this little safe place, and we had this interesting, looking back on it, interesting to think that I was about 12 or 13, and that was my normal. And my dad was away in the army every 3 months. They had to serve for 3 months, and then they had 3 months with their families. And so when Dad was in the army, it was Mum and my 3 little baby sisters. When I was 5 years old, she had a little baby, and then 12 months later, she had twin girls. And Dad was in the army, and he was doing his thing. And when he wasn't in the army, he was back, and he was on soil survey, and he was going back into those areas where he was patrolling as a soldier. He was going back in as a civilian, and they were going in with armored vehicles and weapons and everything to conduct these soil surveys, to put in irrigation schemes and all sorts of things that they did in the Department of Agriculture. Yeah, so that was pretty cool, growing up like that. Dad was away, and when Dad was away, I felt that it was my duty to protect my mother and my sisters. So every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I felt that it was on my shoulders to lock down the house, and to lock all the doors, and to bring all the guns out, and to load them all, and to have them all under the sofa, and we had to close all the curtains, nobody must see in, and we didn't have the lights on in more than one room, or we were in a room and the light was in another room as a decoy, and we lived like that, and we thought that it was normal to kill each other. We just thought everybody disagreed with each other, and so one of us has to live, and you have to choose right now, choose. Is it you and your sister who's going to live? You and your mum? Or is it them? Because if it's them, you may as well just walk over the border right now, because you're a liability. So there was no sweetness or kindness or negotiation. It had to be right, and it had to happen like that right now. And when I was about 18, they had elections, and somebody that we'd never heard of, called Robert Mugabe, got in. And it was a fascinating and bizarre time. everybody that had been our enemy yesterday was now in power over us today. And the national psyche absolutely disintegrated. It was horrific, trying to scramble to find out who was safe and who wasn't safe, and who was your enemy and who was your brother. And one of the huge complicating factors was that all the media talked about was a black on white war, and yet the biggest battalion in the Rhodesian army was black guys. All the white guys got called up on their 17th birthday. It was standard. You got the papers in the mail, all the white guys. But that didn't happen with blacks. It was only voluntary. You weren't conscripted. And it was the biggest unit. And so none of us thought that we were in a racist war. And so we discovered, we had this election, we suddenly were no longer under sanctions. We had this floods of foreign opinion pouring in at us, and my father couldn't cope with it anymore. He'd been passionately loyal to the Rhodesian government and the Rhodesian flag, and he genuinely believed that as a colonialist who had answered the call of the Queen Mother to populate the colonies, that he had a responsibility towards law and order and justice in the country. And he couldn't see a terrorist army bringing that. And so it was huge, it was difficult, it was traumatic. And we left the country and we went to South Africa. And we left in dribs and drabs. I think I was the first of us. I went with my husband then, who I'd married a South African guy at that stage, and I'd had a daughter, and I was terribly idealistic, and I had completely bought into the idea that it was okay that we'd had this war because we were going to make everything right by building a brand new society that nobody had ever seen before. We were going to come together, we were going to learn from this terrible experience that we'd been through, and this way that these politicians and these leaders had lied to us and subverted us and made us into these puppets that were prepared to shoot first and ask questions later. And it all happened crashing around us in just in months, this great, yeah. And so in this environment, I married a South African and I had a baby, and on her birth certificate was stamped in big red letters, "Not a Zimbabwean citizen by birth." And I felt so betrayed, I was going to be the #1 citizen of the brave new world, and how could they do this to me? My father wrote a letter to Robert Mugabe and said, "Guys, we're here. We've worked all these years. We've got all this experience of this country. We've stayed here to be part of this new scene. How can you chase these people away?" But that wasn't actually over. Sorry, that wasn't over the birth certificate. That was over another rejection, which was in fact that my husband's, at the same time that happened, my husband's work permit was turned down because he was a white South African. And so that was really hard for us to come to terms with. We thought naively that we could be part of a new system, and no, actually, healing doesn't happen like that. Healing takes many decades and centuries, even if it can happen. So it was interesting, turmoil and everything, and we were kicked out of the country. We had 6 weeks that was left on his work permit when it was withdrawn. So we had to sell everything, make all the plans to go, find a new job, find a house to live in. I had this new baby. I was expecting another baby, and we ended in South Africa. And that was an amazing journey, because that was in about 1987, I think. 87, February 1987. And the elections, when were the first elections? 1994? I don't know, somewhere around there. So I was there in South Africa for that entire transition from apartheid rule through to releasing Nelson Mandela. And I went through a second surge of that amazing idealism, because I'm tenacious like that. And we were going to have a rainbow nation, and there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and everybody was so dedicated to learning from the mistakes of this really sad and brutal war that was so full of misunderstanding and just heartache. So, of course, poor old Nelson Mandela, like me, was too idealistic to stand up to the test of time. And so they elbowed him out and put in leaders with ideologies that were more closely aligned with their propaganda. And it was really horrible, because around that time, my first husband began to show symptoms of early onset schizophrenia, and he became very violent and very brutal and very nasty. And all sorts of really bad decisions and horrible things happened during that time. And I was studying theology because I had wanted to be a priest in the Anglican Church. And it was amazing. It was like this extraordinary time of like the sort of melting pot of my life. I was following my dream to pursue this really high level, high church theological study. My marriage was disintegrating into this mentally ill, schizophrenic, delusional nightmare. My children were in danger of abuse. Things had become physical between my husband and I. And it was just all too much. And one day I ran away. It was the middle of the night, and it was just terrible. And I ran out the door. I grabbed my keys. I ran out the door. I got into the car. My poor car, I scratched it all over the door with the key, trying to get the key in. I was shaking so much. I scratched the paint with my key. Ever afterwards, it was just this reminder of that night. Jumped in the car and I slammed the door, and I was so glad and I was so safe. And he ran behind me and he pulled down the garage door and he slammed it shut behind me. And he said, "You're not leaving here." And I looked at him and I looked at the door and I put the car in reverse and I smashed right the way through the door. And I drove down the drive and I smashed through the gate and the planks went everywhere. And I ran away. I couldn't do it anymore. And so it ended up with me with so many traumas and awfulnesses, and my poor children being exposed to so much terrible volatility and disintegration of life. And the more I tried to make things normal, the more abnormal things became. I ended up with my parents, and I was in a terrible state, and they didn't know what to do with me, and they were very, very well-respected, genteel people. My father had left his job in the Rhodesian agricultural department, and he was training to be a priest. And my mother was in the high school, where she was a very well-respected English teacher in the senior side of the the senior section of the English department, the upper level of the high school. And there I was, in trauma mode, bleeding all over everyone, just getting divorced, bringing shame everywhere, not coping with the kids. And I met a man in a pub who said he was going to save me. And so I believed him, as you do. And I fell pregnant. And then 3 years later we got married, and then I had another baby. And things just got really, really bad. And I got a job teaching in this amazing school. It was so awesome, guys, I tell you. So in South Africa, all the money and all the tax money developed the schools for the people who paid the taxes, who were all the colonialists. And so there were these millions and billions of black people who honestly were poor, so poor and so uneducated, and they had no money to even pay for school. And so there were certain religious institutions and very wealthy black businessmen who started up little private schools to try and educate black children. And so around about that time, my eldest two children were in high school, and these two young ones had been born. And I ended up getting a job in this little school. I don't know if you would call it school. It was some buildings made out of block. The windows were all broken. Most of the doors didn't close properly. Most of the hinges were off. The roofs mostly didn't leak, but every now and then they had to be fixed. There was no playgrounds, it was just dirt everywhere. And the chickens used to jump on the desks. The goats used to walk through. It was good times, guys. I loved teaching the kids. I had these two little boys in one of my classes. Their mom and dad worked in a mine, sort of, I don't know how far away, 2 hours drive down the road. And these two little boys lived in a little shack behind somebody's house, behind somebody's home. And they lived there, and they cooked for themselves, and they washed for themselves. And they had one bowl of porridge a day that they ate. And they would make it in the morning before school, and they'd have it for breakfast, and they'd bring a portion of it to school for lunch. And then when they got home, they would have the last bit of it. Then they'd clean all the pots and pans, get ready for the morning when that was their meal again for the next day. They always, their uniforms were impeccable. They washed them themselves. They ironed them themselves. They were always on school every single day. Their homework was always done. It was extraordinary to teach those children. They were so hungry to know. And they knew that education was their only chance of changing this absolute dire poverty that nothing can make an impact on, because it is just so profound and endless. And you have to change your own life, because nobody's coming to save you. And so I was there with these little tiny orphans, and there was one little girl there who'd worn the same dress to school since she'd been 4 years old, and she was about 14, I think. There was a gangster. He'd been let out of jail, and he was desperate to get his matric certificate before he became too old to qualify to get it. He just wanted to do anything to change his life, and he was barely literate, and he wanted to change his life so much. And on spring day, it was so cool. There was no school. The children completely disobeyed all the teachers. If a teacher said anything to them, they just ignored them. And they had water. They had these buckets of water. Any container that they could come across, And they spent the whole day hunting us down and pouring water over us. I've got a picture of myself standing sodden from top to bottom with water that these kids had just doused us in. It was their revenge. They were allowed one day a year on spring day. So it was fun times. It was amazing things. And then my second husband's drinking started getting very bad, very bad. And I got to a point where I said, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work anymore. And things just disintegrated and became horrific and abusive, and the drinking became so beyond everything. So I was unbelievably and exquisitely lucky that my mother had been given a, what do you call it when you get a job from, she was given this job opportunity offer from a school in Tyler, Texas. It was a Christian-based school, and one of the things they wanted to do was that they wanted to have an outreach to children anywhere in the world who had experienced the trauma of growing up during war. And so they wanted teachers on their staff who knew how to educate children through war situations and the types of behavioral difficulties that children have. And so my mom was perfect for the job because she'd brought up 5 children and she taught all the way through the Rhodesian Bush War. And then the other thing was that the school had another interesting idea, is that they wanted to teach the children English, but English was boring, so they wanted to use history as the subject matter to teach the poems and the plays and the literature and the everything. So it was 2 in 1. So my mother had been an English and history teacher, and so now she could take all that English and history experience and she could create the syllabus, which was teaching English through the medium of history. And that was a real amazing thing. And she got this incredible opportunity when she was 60. She flew over, and my dad was so excited because he was going to go to Texas. I mean, the only place in the world to really be is Texas. And he was getting to go there. The land of all things awesome and cowboyish. And they went over, and my marriage fell into horrendous drunkenness, and he started walking around with a loaded shotgun saying that his life wasn't worth living, and horrible, scary days. And my mum contacted me and said, there's this thing here at the school where they will allow us to send our children and grandchildren to the school for no fees, and so we could let Bessie and Buddy come over here and be educated. And it was like God opening a door for my children to be able to get out of this abuse. So we got out of the abuse. Oh me, oh my. It took me about 10 times of trying to fill in the American visa application before I got it right for my children. You have to get everything right on the right line. You have to get the full stops in the right space, and you're not allowed spelling mistakes. That was so scary. And we didn't have proper transport because he was drinking all the money, and so there was never any money. And so we traveled up from Barberton to Johannesburg on a 250cc motorbike. Oh my word. I think I nearly fell off. I was so exhausted and so cold. On the way up there, it was so cold. We had to leave early in the morning to try and get to the embassy when it opened. It was so cold. And we stopped about halfway because we couldn't hold on the bike anymore. And we went into this like truck stop place to get a coffee. We couldn't open the sugar packets. Oh, so bad. Anywho, I managed to get my kids on the plane, and they went and spent, I don't know how long Bessie spent, maybe 4 years with them. And yeah, and they brought my children some sanity. They gave them some sanity, and they gave them this extremely wonderful and unbelievable education that they had. And my son's now a engineer. He works for a company where he's in charge of, I don't know what it is, their databases and their something, but like he's a qualified engineer, hardware engineer. So he runs all the hardware and then he operates these other systems, and he's just so cool. And my daughter has a PhD, and I think that she works as a business analyst or something in a computer. I'm not sure what she does. She worked as in the government as a policy advisor, I think, for a while, but I think now she's moved more into management and computing. And yeah, so they went over to America and started their lives. And I can't remember where I've got up to in my story, but I think that it's probably about Dave drinking and things going so badly, and it just becoming just beyond a joke. I mean, he took the car one day and he went off to Mozambique, and on the way he met somebody with a bag of cannabis, and I didn't see him for 3 weeks, and he spent all the money, and then he nearly got the car impounded. And me oh my, I went to his mother and I said, I'm done, I'm so sorry, but he's gone, he's out of my life. I'm never going to ever speak to him ever again. I just can't. I'm being the breadwinner. I've got these 2 little children. My kids are overseas and I never see them. And now this. I'm sorry, I'm done. So, yeah. She was horrified and shattered that I would bring shame onto the family by doing that. And she said, we'll just give him one more chance. We'll go to New Zealand and he can start fresh. It's too hard for him here. The war is too much of a scar and there's too much brutality, and he just can't pick himself up. We'll give him a good start. We'll let Carly and Jessie have a life. And I said, I can't afford the tickets. And she said, don't be silly, I'm going to buy you the tickets. Just say yes. And so I said yes. And so one of my therapists once said to me, oh, that's good, so you allowed yourself to be bought. So yeah, if that's what I did, that's what I did. I made a deal to come over here, and I found out after that was that she was desperate to immigrate and to get away from Africa, but the only way she could get into New Zealand to be here with her daughter, who'd already immigrated here, was if the center of gravity of her family was already here in New Zealand. So she had to get her son over here, and because her son had no qualifications and didn't have a job, she would never, and so she wouldn't be able to immigrate here. And so I was the way. And so I came over here on a ticket to be a teacher because I'd had the teaching experience in Burgersfort. And yeah, it was so amazing getting to New Zealand. It was such a culture shock. I'm still not over it, and I got here 22 years ago. It was about a week ago, I think, 22 years ago. Actually, no, it's the 5th today. So it was the 2nd, so 3 days ago. 22 years and 3 days ago, I got to New Zealand. And for the first 6 weeks that I was here, the sun didn't come out behind the clouds. And I started thinking, what have I done? What have I done? I don't know if I can live here in the wastelands. After being a child of Africa and running around barefoot on the plains, you know. Anyway, you know, life goes on, and there's actually more to the world than weather. Although when you move from Africa to New Zealand, I have to tell you, it does seem that weather is the only thing that exists. However, I got a job and I worked here in what they call a Decile 1 school, which was, they have a system here where their schools are ranked from Decile 1 to Decile 10. Decile 10 are the rich people's kids, and Decile 1s are the guys that are on welfare and on the benefits. And so, yeah, I'd had this teaching experience in this bush school, so to speak. And so I had this opportunity to jump into the school, and unfortunately, oh, I don't know how it is, so many things. Dave had an accident at work, and instead of him being able to comply with the instructions of the medical departments, he just made everything into a fuss and he started drinking. And so I, in my stupidity and innocence, said to him, "You've always said how great it is to travel, and we're in this place where we're sort of in the middle of things. Why don't we take 6 months out? We can sell everything that we've got here. We can take 6 months out. We can travel around New Zealand, because this is a very common thing that people do here. It's a real New Zealandy wonderful thing, is to just take a year out of your life and travel around in a camper van." So I said to him, "Look, we're in this situation. Things are really bad. You're not well. You don't have a job. Lots of stuff happening." What I didn't understand was that when you're traveling around, you're not really living. So I made an arrangement with the government to homeschool the kids. So I got all the books and set that all up, took the kids out of school, bought this little camper van set up, and decided that we're going to get on with our lives, and we're going to take the children on this great adventure around New Zealand, learn our new home, settle down, heal, adjust to the countryside. Oh me, oh my, I'm so idealistic. So it wasn't like that. What it was like is that the people that you meet when you're traveling are on holiday, and lots of them, this is their only 2 weeks on holiday that they have for the whole year, and the back of their car is full of beer, boxes of beer. And if you're a cunning and seasoned traveler, you can find the way to go from car to car and bludge off everybody's beer. And so that's how we lived for 6 months, until I figured out what was happening, and that this wasn't just some sort of blip on the radar. And we reached Balclutha, and there was not just alcohol there, but there was weed. And things started just deteriorating, and there was never any time for schooling, and we couldn't tidy anything up. Oh my word, I can't even tell you all the things. And this very bizarre, strange woman that I'd met a week before in some little camp on the side of the road. So much freedom camping here. You just pull over in a big sort of I don't know, truck stop sort of lane. I don't know what you call them. There's a real word for them. You pull over and other people pull over, and there's picnic tables and barbecue tables, and put up tents and chill for the night, and then you all drive off again the next day. And so we met this woman at this place, and it was hideous and awful and embarrassing, and he was roaring drunk. And I kept on trying to say to the kids, "Come guys, let's go to bed. Come on, it's getting quite late. I'll read you a story," and off we go to bed. Come on. And it's just awful. And 2 weeks later, she phoned me and she said, "Oh, you know, your son told me it's his birthday tomorrow, and I'm coming. I've bought him a present in Balclutha, no, in somewhere. Can't remember, Nugget Point. and I'm coming to give it to him, and we've got to have dinner together, and blah blah blah. Anyway, so this bizarre woman, Irene, arrived out of the blue, and her traveling companion, Ian, had a crate of beers, and he said, "Hello, Dave, my friend," and he took Dave off down to the end of the park, and off they went and had some roaring party, and we fed the children and we put them to bed, and then Irene said, "Come and talk to me," and she made me sit with her all night until 4 o'clock in the morning, until she'd made me promise to phone the women's refuge. She said, "You can't do this," and I said, "But it's not me," and she said, "It is you. You are allowing this to happen. This is you." Anyway, so I made her a promise, and the next day I got up very, very grumpy, but I kept the promise, and I went and phoned the women's refuge, and she said, "Take your stuff down to the police station." So they came and got us from Invercargill, from the women's refuge, and they put us in a safe house. And Carly and Jessie and I, we started on our own bizarre little journey. And it was horrible and hideous, and I did everything wrong, and I was on the benefit, and I didn't know how to be on the benefit, and I was so ashamed of wearing second-hand clothes and feeding my children pies and chips and just cringe. It was just too hard. And so I went to the doctor and I said, "It's so hard," and he said, "Here, take these pills." And I said, "Yay, thanks." And I became a zombie. Every time I went back to the doctor, he just put the dose up of the pills, and I kept on going back and saying, "Well, it's not working. Pills aren't working. I'm still having difficulties here." So he'd say, "Here, have a pill." So I got put on lithium and I don't know, Xanax. I don't know what there was. Prozac, I think. Amitriptyline. Oh, so many long lists of them. And the more they gave them to me, the more I slept. And so we were living in this little government house and on government money. The taxpayers were funding us. And I was absolutely zombied out. And I would wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and get the kids to school. And then I would collapse back into bed for 2 hours. And then I'd crawl out of bed and I'd do 2 hours work because I was studying, because, you know, on welfare. I'd signed an agreement that I was going to work my way off welfare by re-educating and getting a new job, something that I could cope with that was less stressful than teaching. And oh me, oh my, it sounded good at the time, and it wasn't. So I was on this little course that I was doing, correspondence course that I was doing with the kids, and they were going off to school. And then Dave would come along every now and then and say, "I need Carly. Carly's my daughter and you're keeping her from me." And he would go to the lawyers and he would get Carly and he would take her off and they would go on some wild adventure somewhere where he was going to save the world by, I don't know what. Every single time it was some new thing, and off she would go with him, and then it wouldn't work out, and he'd come and he'd bring her to me for a holiday, and he was meant to come back in 2 weeks to fetch her, and he wouldn't arrive. And so then the social welfare would say, "What's happening with your daughter? She's not in school." And I would say, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do." So they would say, "Here's some money, go and buy her a uniform and put her in school." So she would go in school, and then 2 months later he would arrive and say, "Why are you taking my daughter from me? And get your clothes, we're leaving right this instant. Nobody's keeping my children from me." And he'd put her in the car and take her off and go off on some other. And the little girl adored him and thought that he was God and went with him everywhere. And every adventure, some arsehole came along and stuffed everything up for them. And yeah, what really happened was he started stealing, and then he would get found out, and Carly never knew, and I never knew, she didn't know. And so she was back and forth like a ping pong ball between us, and it was just awful. And I went to university and I started getting I moved from doing correspondence, and I decided that what I needed to do was I needed to make some connections with people now. I'd been in New Zealand for long enough, and I'd done all this stuff that it hadn't really worked. But now I was on this proper program with social welfare. I was going to get off, and the next step would be to do my final year on campus and make some actual connections between people. And so I went to this polytech that was offering a degree course in, it was a bachelor in applied visual arts. So I think I did some sculpture and some painting and some digital photography and some photoshopping, and I don't remember all the things we did. And I made lots of bad decisions. And Carly kept on going back and forth, and then he ran off with somebody's wife, and then Carly went and lived with them again, and everything was going to be wonderful. And it was hideous and awful. And it just went on getting worse and worse and worse. And I got to the end of my degree, and David took the children and went off on an adventure somewhere, and I met Callum online. I was on this dating service. I thought, well, like, it hadn't quite worked out how I'd envisaged it at university, but maybe what I would do was I would take my degree and I'd move up to Wellington, and I do a master's there. And then if I did the master's in Wellington, I would be into the art community, because Wellington is full of art galleries. And I'd learned the system here, and I knew how it worked, and I knew how to fund myself as an artist, and I knew how to get a residency, and it was going to be so good, guys. It was going to be so good, but it wasn't good. Anyway, so I met Callum online when I was looking for, I was looking to make this transition to move up to Wellington and do this master's degree. I was going to do something so cool. What I was doing with my art degree was that I was building vertical gardens. I was taking tree ferns and mosses and ferns, and I was building these great big boards, and I was dripping water down the boards as if it was a waterfall. And then I was planting all these ferns and mosses in amongst this water. So I just had this, it was meant to be a self-sustaining system where the water dripped down into a trough, and the fertilizer went through the pumps up to the top, and then they would, and you just have this fairy garden. They were called Organoscapes. It was so good. I was going to be a millionaire and be an artist, and everybody was going to know about me. But no, it didn't happen. Instead, Jesse had a terrible crisis and a breakdown and told me that he was gay. And then he started threatening suicide. And around about that time, I discovered that Carly had made a couple of suicide attempts and was slashing her arms. And so my blood ran cold, and I started imagining my child lying on the floor in a puddle of blood. And I didn't know what to do. I'd moved here to Wellington. Jessie was going to pieces. Carly was slashing herself. Everything was awful. And I just muddled on and muddled on and muddled on. And so I changed my name. I changed my name from my birth name to Roberta Wessex. That's another 2-hour story, so we won't go there. And I started trying to establish myself in an art practice. And I met Richard from Not a Party, and I decided, and he said, "Oh, do you know what's your problem? You're an anarchist." And I said, "Damn, is that what's wrong with me? Jeez, now I get it. It all makes sense." So he gave me some tips to help me understand this condition in my brain, the fact that I have anarchy flowing in my blood in my veins instead of blood. It's interesting. And I got into this little political life, and it was great. and I thought that it was going to work. And then Jesse's decided that he wanted to have stuff happened, and I broke up with Callum, and I took Jesse off to try and get him some help. And I went back to Invercargill, and I went back into the whole crowd that I had known when I was on welfare, and I went straight back into that life, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Jesse had a spontaneous pulmonothorax, which is when your lung collapses. And he had to go into hospital, and they cut through his ribs and pulled them apart and pulled his lung up and sewed it back onto his body and that. And I don't know quite what it was, but around that time he just became awful. Just became awful. And then I lost the house that we were staying in, and things became difficult, and I was stupid, and I lost my temper with the estate agent and said, oh, all right then, if you're just going to give me notice, give me notice. And so she did, surprisingly. And Jesse and I ended up in a motel, and then we ended up having a physical confrontation, and then I ended up putting stuff in the car and driving away and coming back up to Wellington and saying, Callum, please save me. I don't know what's happened. I can't do this. I can't do this. And he said, okay, let me help you. And so he gave me a bed to sleep in and a roof over my head. And then he employed me and gave me a job. And then he brought me here to the orchard, and he taught me how to look after the avos. And I said to him, Callum, you shouldn't do this because, the story of Pygmalion, dude. You're going to do this for me. You're going to pick me up out of the gutter, and you're going to give me everything, and you're going to heal me. And the story is that I leave you. You can't do this. It's not justifiable for you to take this risk. And so he went away, and he thought about it, and he came back to me, and he said, look, I won't help you. I'll put it on you to help yourself. But I will give you a stable environment in which to do this. I think that was in about 2014. So it was 10 years ago. And yeah, he's just been there. That's what he did. That's what he's done. And all through everything that I've done and all the things that I've tried and failed and tried and failed and tried this and screwed that up and messed this up and misjudged that, and he's just been there. And slowly and slowly and slowly, all the misperceptions and defilements and all the things that I built up by having these relationships that just went so bad, it started to shift, and I started to realize that, yeah, there's a place for me. I did the right thing. I changed my name, and I changed my life, and I changed my playground, and I've changed my playthings. And then I needed to change my playmates because I kept on going back to my old boyfriend. Every single time, I don't know what would happen. There was in some cyclical demonic pattern of abuse where you just go round and round in this horrible thing, and every now and then something would happen, and instead of me being normal and life going on well, I would suddenly think that Callum was trying to kill me and that he was booby trapping me and he was tricking me into doing things. Oh my, I don't even want to admit to it all. And I'd run out of the house and I'd get in the car and I'd drive away, and I'd end up somewhere for a few days, and then somebody would say, listen, please go home, and I'd go home again. And then I started meeting people on minds.com, and it was just the most bizarre an extraordinary thing that had ever happened to me. I was safe because I had a name that wasn't my name, but it was me. And I had a picture on my face. And I was talking to all these people that had names that weren't their names, and they had pictures on their faces. And they were so nice. It was so amazing. And they were so wild. and rude and vicious and attacky. And man, they would fight with each other like nobody's business. And everybody say things about everybody else. And the sweetest, most loving, kind people. And it just added another layer to the healing, you know, to discover this group of people. And so I started making my life. And Carly had been in a counseling program to deal with her self-harm issues and her abandonment issues and everything. And there's a lot of interaction over the years, and I tried very hard, and her relationship, another relationship, broke up, and she came to live with me. And Callum and I were trying to change things to try and make a place for her. We had discussed how we were going to sell this place, buy another place that had a house, and that had a little house out the back, and then she could be there. And then as she did university, she'd have this base to work from. And as she went through university, she would develop, she was studying psychology. So I knew she was going to be doing all this introspection and looking at herself and everything. And she didn't make it through because COVID came along, and all the connections that I'd built up for her and everything that I thought was going to happen because she was at university was stopped because we were in lockdown. And so it happened to her again. She was kicked out of the system. She was alone and she couldn't cope. And her mood started going up and down, and she started making decisions. And it was difficult. And it ended up with her killing herself, which was really, really, really hard to do after everything. And so it came to the time of Woman Cries into Camera. I needed to talk. I remember one day I just said to my sister, how are you dealing with it? How are you dealing with it? How are you getting through this? I'm not getting through this. I don't know if I'll ever be through this. And she said, well, we've talked and 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 we've talked. And I thought, nobody ever talks to me, poor little me. And then I thought to myself, well, you know, there is my cell phone, and I know we're not meant to use our cell phones, but damn, maybe I'll just talk to this thing. And so I jumped on board with the tradition of people who haven't got anybody to talk to and talk to everybody. And I did it. And Rush came to me and said, good on you. I started off and I said the first time I ever did it, I ever made a video, I said, well, here I am. And so Rush used to come onto my videos and say, oh, here you are again. And I just used to plod one day at a time. I think the first video I made was 4 minutes. And basically it said, here I am. I'm trying to do something. Trying to do a thing. Don't know what the thing is, but I'm trying to do it. And I'll try and do the thing. And so Rush encouraged me to just keep going. And so I just kept going. And I didn't know what I was doing or why I was doing it, but I was just going on trust that this was a person that I'd known for the last 5 years, hadn't known well, but had known, and we'd had some really good, deep conversations, and he'd given me this advice, and he'd said, keep going, and I thought, okay, well, it might not be the user manual that I want, but keep going. And then this guy called Otto jumped on my post and he said, you know, you've got a very Buddhist outlook. And I was like, whoa, okay, what does that mean? So I started asking him what that means. Like, how could I be a Buddhist? How could I be a Buddhist? I didn't know that. It was the skills. I'd managed to do something without knowing that I'd done it. And it was so fun, guys. It was so fun. It transformed my life. I learned to control my emotions. which I don't do very well yet, but compared to what it was, like, I don't run out of the house screaming anymore. I haven't been on psychiatric medicine for 9 months. Wow, there's a long list of things that Buddhism, no, yes, meditation within the context of Buddhism has done for me. Plus, of course, Otto's my admirable friend, so it means that every single day of my life he sends me a message to keep me going and a talk that he picks out for me to inspire me and reassure me and feed me and help me. And so every single day I have him like talking to me about, I don't know, like I'm a 3-year-old. And then there's so many other people. Do Better introduced me to Jaffe. I was on Jaffe's show. Censorship Sucks has allowed me to tell my story on his show and invited me to be a guest on his show. I mean, I can't even remember all the people who have drawn in around me as this little lonely voice crying in the wilderness, and have offered me words of comfort and advice and encouragement, and have called me out when I've been doing things that were rather wrong. And this extraordinary journey, and it just continues and continues. And then this fellow called Roger watched one of my shows. And like, not just that he watched one of my shows, he talked to me about it. He actually, instead of saying, oh, you mainstream shill with your crap that you're pushing to everybody, why do you even bother to get out of bed in the morning? Which is good, you know. It's great when people come along and tell you that. It's like, yeah, he saw me, cool. But it's much nicer when somebody comes and says, wow, I listened to your stuff and I thought that you had some good points of view and I'd really like to talk to you. And that was a huge, amazing thing, that somebody was interested in the sort of content that I was attempting to generate, because, yeah, that's another 2-hour story. Yeah, so then here I met Roger and Mark and Tan and Karma and I don't remember who else. So many people. Then Summer, John, Summer, Austin, Robot. And of course, while this is all happening and that's happening, then the next thing that's happening is, while that's happening, is that the Infinite Imaginarium is chugging back into life for another season of podcasts and web shows and things. And so they asked me if I would be involved in their show, which is just such an honor and a privilege. That would be mine's first ever Web3 series. Isn't that cool? And we recorded the real Minds Fest, which that's a joke as well. We recorded it and then Satori put it up, a little snatch of it up today of Otto and Dan and I don't know who else did it, Roger, all launching tokens on the blockchain. Oh, it's so much fun. It's like this whole world full of opportunities to reach out to people and to build people up and to okay, stop ranting now. It's just so exciting. So Story D made the video of the Minds Fest, the snippet, and I said, hey, why don't you mint it into an NFT so we can have it as a collectible? And so he did. So now I have to get some money together and buy my very first ever show, like thing recording NFT, because that's what I would really like to do. That would be my dream, would be to have all my shows as NFTs. Why would I want to do that? I don't know. just sort of seems like when you live such a bizarre and weird life and you go through all these experiences and so many things that you try don't work out, you get to this place where you're free, you know. It doesn't really matter anymore. You can do anything because everybody else is doing wildly improbable things, and you might succeed or you might fail. But the only real failure of it all is not giving it a go. And I think I found that out for myself. I think that after Carly died, I just needed to retreat from the world, and I just needed to lick my wounds and try and figure out, yeah, it's been hard. But now, I don't know. It's new and it's different, and I'm trying again. And I've got this amazing, incredible man who's been with me through all the stupidity that there's no excuse for, please. And I'm so blessed and so lucky. And about 2 months ago, he had terrible problems with his gallbladder, and he went for a scan so they could find out what was wrong. And they found a massive tumor in his abdomen that's crushing all his organs. And yeah, it would have been killing him if they hadn't quickly intervened and started with medicine and chemotherapy, which starts tomorrow morning. He would have not made it. But modern medicine and the amazing, incredible chance of him being able to beat this. The doctor says he's got a 50-50 chance, and she says that they're aiming for cure, not for treatment. So those are two very odd things to be told, but you know, it is what it is. And the other day I said to him, you know, Callum, we don't know what's going to happen, and we've got to live this now, because maybe we've got 6 months, maybe we've got 2 years, maybe we've got 20 years, maybe we've got 40 years. We don't know, but let's try and make some plans. Like, is there something that you'd like to do? Was there anything that's not done in your life that we can do together before you die? And he said, no, I'm done. I've had a good life. I've done my stuff. And yeah. And so I thought, well, you know, that's nice. That's a good, strong, positive attitude with which to face a disease and a very, very harsh treatment. Anyway, so he came to me the next day and he said, you know that thing that you said to me about, is there anything that I want to do before I die? And I said, yeah, I know that thing. And he said, will you marry me? And so I said, yeah, sure. And so we decided that on the 25th of May, 25th of October, shoot, I can't remember what the day is. We've decided that on the 25th, I think it might be the 25th of May 2025, or the 25th of October. Anyway, there's a day. We've set a day, maybe. And we're going to get an engagement ring. And we're going to do happily ever after. And so that's kind of up to the date news. And thank you for listening to me. That is the most amazingly beautiful gift. I'm so grateful to you. I'm done. Thank you. I'm done.
That was great. Well, I'm used to calling them leads, but I tell everybody stories. But that's a great lead. That's probably one of the best ones I've heard. I've heard a lot of them, and I really knew that this was the time where you needed to do it, and I'm glad you did it. Now,
Yeah.
now, after you've told your story, this is where it's opened up to Rush and Otto. If you guys have any feedback or any questions you wish to ask, this is the time to do it. So, unmute yourself and come in and ask some questions.
So cool, bobdub.
Hey, Rush.
It was really, it's nice hearing your voice and your stories and
Thanks.
wonderful news. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming and listening. Thank you. And thank you for sharing my news with me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I've been able to help. If I've been able to help at all, you get through things, and of course, many congratulations on your upcoming neutrals. And I'm actually glad that you're giving us a heads up on the date, so that I'm sure all of us here on Minds are going to be sending you nice wedding presents. Let's be traditional fish slice, or we'll find something.
It's so sweet. Thank you. I'm all embarrassed and blushing. Oh, guys, thank you so much. I just never be able to be here or be able to do these things without your support and your backing and your guidance and your patience and your wisdom, honestly. There's so many things that I haven't said and so many things that you've done for me that I haven't shared. I just feel I haven't really done justice to you, but I'm so grateful.
I think it's the other way around, to be honest. I mean, you're a gift. I don't know about these guys. Well, I do kind of. Like, you can tell.
Here, I'm on your side.
You know what I mean? Like, but I mean, you've been a blessing since the day I met you. I've met some amazing people, but you take the cake. You are an amazing person, bobdub.
Oh, Roger, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. I don't quite understand why you see that, but thanks. I'll just believe you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, are you guys okay, or you want to say anything to her? This is your time.
Thank you for being here, Roberta. It's always a pleasure to hear your
Thank
story.
you.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so honored that you listened. It's so amazing. Gosh. Anyway, thank you.
I'm gonna send you a copy of this whenever we're done. So don't think that it's not. I've just got to figure out exactly if everything recorded fine or streamed fine. And I apologize for not being able to do the recording thing, but like I found out I screwed up on the settings earlier, so I needed to go in and reset the bit rate and everything. So, but I will have a copy for you, and it'll be available.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. That's just wonderful. That's so lovely. I'm really grateful for that. I would like a copy of this. That's
All right.
very special time.
All right. If you guys have nothing else to say and we're done, I guess we can end this. You guys agree?
Well,
I'm all set.
yeah, it's super great.
Okay.
Thank you for having me again. It truly is a special time and moment.
Yeah, I agree.
It's
Yes,
such a good outlook.
Okay.
Sorry, I
Go.
didn't hear that, Rush. What did you say?
He-
Just that it's a very special moment, and
Oh.
you have such a great outlook, and it really is amazing.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. Thank you, Rush. Thank you. Thank you for helping me build it.
You know, the cool part is they didn't stop streaming yet, so we got that.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Roger, for organizing this and for letting me do this. This is a very amazing and intense experience.
I suggest this above everything else when it comes to spirituality. A lot of people never get the chance or the opportunity to tell their story to anybody, and like when you have a chance to do this, I'm not just talking to you, but everybody. If you're watching this, you take the opportunity to tell your story to somebody. You know, because
Yeah, definitely. This is an amazing experience. I feel so extraordinarily validated, and as if I'm real. I feel solid. I don't even know how to explain it, but I just feel that you've given me something that I didn't have an hour or two ago. And this is just, yeah, I can agree with you, Roger. I recommend this.
okay. And
Bless you.
do you want to say something else, or do you want me to bring it to an end? I love your avatar, by the way. That is so cool.
Thank you. That's another gift from Callum. Everything I have is from him. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, no, thank you.
Okay.